Good morning. It is working now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our high-level leaders who just came. So the first session of this conference will be the welcoming remarks from the Finance Minister, but these remarks will be delivered by the Secretary for Development and Budget from the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Olisitse Harold Masimega. Mr. Masimega, would you like to take the floor, please?
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies. I'll be making these brief remarks on behalf of the Minister, who is held up with other national commitments. She would have very much liked to be here, but owing to circumstances beyond her control, she won't be here with us, but she's with us in spirit. My remarks will be fairly short so that the business could resume or start. Director of Ceremonies, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Mayor Antoinette Seya, and your delegation, Her Excellency, former President of Liberia, Dr. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Your Excellency, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Dr. Monique Nsaza Baganwa, Executive Director, Africa Group 1 Constituency, IMF, Meita Emma Natoko, Governors and Deputy Governors, and board members of the Bank of Botswana and other central banks, Your Worship, the Mayor of the City of Gaborone, Honorable Austin Abraham, Your Excellencies, members of the diplomatic corps, and heads of international organizations, senior government officials, heads of parastatals, and central bank officials here present, captains of industry, and representatives of civil societies, distinguished moderators and resource persons, participants, media practitioners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I'm honored and pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Minister to the beautiful Republic of Botswana, our pride, your destination. In this regard, I wish to appreciate your choice of Botswana to host the conference, which I believe takes into account our capabilities, including technological maturity to seamlessly accommodate in-person and virtual hybrid engagements, the entrenchment of health protocols, especially around COVID-19. It is my belief that your choice of Botswana is also a testimony to our record of good governance, relatively low levels of corruption, and related institutional arrangements. Honored guests, while welcoming you to Botswana, I need to acknowledge the difficult times during which we are meeting. The first challenge was occasioned by a COVID-19 pandemic, now in its third year, which literally stopped global economic growth in its tracks and dampened prospects for inclusive growth and economic integration. Nevertheless, a positive outcome is the acceleration of digitalization, which has the potential to foster new economic opportunities and enhanced inclusion. The second challenge relates to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, which has disrupted trade and access to essential products and accelerated inflation, thereby eroding incomes and living standards. In the medium to long term, there are real risks of reversal of the benefits of trade and economic integration, especially for developing and emerging market economies as the world settles into disparate and segmented economic, trading, and currency blocks. Ladies and gentlemen, given the range of expertise of speakers, discussants, and participants in this conference, I have no doubt you will navigate and explore the relevance of good governance and fight against corruption on economic performance and stability. As my contribution, allow me to project a few aspects that I consider pertinent to the discussions. First, there is need for clarity on the bounds and definitions of good governance and corruption. This is because it is often difficult to recognize inappropriate behavior and unethical conduct under the strict jurisdiction of poor governance and corruption. Nevertheless, I believe good governance, at the minimum, should entail a clear definition of objectives and deliverables, an appropriate leadership, operational and oversight structure for the purpose, accountability frameworks for performance, and remedial measures where objectives are not met. Honored guests, the second aspect is the potential for good institutional governance to foster effective and impactful delivery of government services, provision of utilities, balanced regulation of various areas of economic activity, and business promotion activities. The third perspective that needs to be highlighted is that weak governance and corruption not only constrain service delivery and therefore economic activity, but generally raises costs. This affects the government budget, given the continuous allocation of resources to, for example, government projects and utility providers that do not generate the requested outcomes nor returns. In addition, the cost of procurement can be unreasonably high and prolonged. Moreover, there can be significant claims on government and other institutions associated with unprocedural procurements. Furthermore, the costs of doing business tend to rise, reducing prospects for employment and profitability. Ultimately, weak governance and corruption delays transition from poverty and neutralization of inequality. Ladies and gentlemen, fourth, an environment of weak governance and corruption also tends to undermine project execution for both businesses and individuals, extending the time between capital allocation and the generation of project cash flows. If this involves borrowed funds, this leads to an increase in loan defaults, which can worsen asset quality of lending institutions and, therefore, threaten financial stability. Lastly, along these lines, I need to mention the possibility of weak governance and corruption scaring foreign investors and potential business partners that could support economic expansion and modernization, or at worst, attracting the wrong kind that would perpetuate the bad outcomes for the economy and society. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, overall, good governance and the fight against corruption are critical for sustaining the integrity of a whole chain of institutions, including service providers, program implementation agencies, procurement processes, and regulatory institutions. Alternatively, weaknesses signify failure of policy implementation, ultimately affecting macroeconomic performance and challenging the execution and resilience of macroeconomic policy frameworks. I believe it is in consideration of this that the IMF now has in place, as part of its surveillance programs, a new framework for enhanced IMF engagement on governance and corruption. For Botswana, we continue to pride ourselves with maintenance of a strong, stable, and predictable institutional framework that provides support for enduring macroeconomic stability. This is attested by the rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, in their regular ratings review, as well as successive IMF Article 4 surveillance missions. However, honored guests, as I hinted earlier, we should not be resting on our laurels. This is because the more recent ratings on governance and corruption show a deterioration which you should address decisively. As I said, as the Minister said when presenting the budget speech in February this year, we will fail to improve service delivery and productivity unless we confront corruption both in the public and private sector space. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I wish you fruitful engagements and deliberations and hope for beneficial outcomes and learning points from the conference, overall entrenching of institutional resilience with respect to good governance and shunning of corruption. I also hope that your stay in Botswana will be enjoyable, even as we remain constrained by the need to protect ourselves against COVID-19, and will entail future business opportunities for your corporates back home and for our businesses in your countries, as well as repeat business and tourist visits. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, with that, I hereby declare the higher level conference on promotion of good governance and fight against corruption officially open. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masimega, for these kind words. Thank you very much for hosting the conference. Indeed, the choice of Botswana was relatively easy, given the leadership role that Botswana is playing in the area, in this region. We will move now to the keynote speech. We will have two keynote speeches. The first one will be delivered by our Deputy Managing Director, Madame Antoinette Monsieur-Saye. It is my pleasure to introduce Antoinette. Before assuming her new role at the IMF, Antoinette Monsieur-Saye was a distinguished visiting fellow at the Center for Global and co-chair for Global Development and co-chair for the recently concluded 19th replenishment of the International Development Association, IDA 19, the World Bank's Fund for the Poorest. She previously oversaw and significantly enhanced the International Monetary Fund's engagement with its sub-Saharan African member as the director of the African Department between July 2008 and August 2016. As Minister of Finance in post-conflict Liberia from January 2006 to June 2008, she led the country through the clearance of its long-standing multilateral debt areas, the HIPIC decision point, the highly indebted poor country, the Paris Club, and its first poverty reduction strategy, significantly strengthening its public finances and championing public financial management reform. Before joining President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf's cabinet, Mrs. Saye worked for the World Bank for 17 years, including as country director for Benin, Niger, and Togo, senior country economist for Pakistan and Afghanistan. Madame Saye graduated with a bachelor's degree with honors in economics from Swarthmore College and a PhD in international economic relations from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Antoinette, the floor is yours. Welcome to Gaborone.
Well, thanks so very much, Abdul, for that very kind introduction. And a very good morning to everyone. On behalf of the International Monetary Fund and its Africa Training Institute, I welcome you warmly to this conference, jointly organized with the African Union Commission. So let me start by, of course, first thanking the Ministry of Finance and Governor Moses Pilalo and the Central Bank and the Botswana authorities for hosting this forum and for their generous hospitality. So it's especially appropriate, as we also just heard from the Secretary from the Ministry of Finance, that we are gathered. It is especially appropriate that we're gathered here in Botswana today for this conference. Botswana has an excellent story. Its trajectory from one of the world's poorest economies to now an upper middle income country is a testament to prudent macroeconomic management, strong governance, and good institutions. I'm confident that Botswana can leverage this strong foundation by continuing to uphold the highest standards of governance. Let me also commend the African Union Commission for its leadership in promoting good governance and transparency. We need to step up our collective efforts to enhance transparency, improve governance, and reduce vulnerabilities to corruption. This issue is more than just about wasted money. It is about the erosion of social contract and the corrosion of the government's ability to grow the economy in a way that benefits all citizens. Of course, corruption has long been an issue, but today we face multiple crises at once. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, the war in Ukraine, and the ongoing challenges of climate change and the security situation in the Sahel. So the need for good governance has only become more urgent. And these multiple crises have made it very clear that countries that have strong economic institutions could respond more effectively to these challenges and better prepare for a resilient recovery. And that is true across any level of development. We also recognize that addressing corruption is an international issue, given the role of professions that enable corruption and jurisdictions that provide safe harbor for the proceeds of corruption. So today, I'd like to talk about three things. First, how we at the IMF are stepping up our engagement with the region on governance and anti-corruption issues. Second, some of the success stories we are seeing across Africa. And finally, what are the key elements of good governance and accountability that stand out in these examples, and that the region as a whole must focus on to truly seize Africa's potential. So I'll begin with the IMF's increased emphasis on this issue. The fund's enhanced framework on governance and corruption, approved in 2018, builds on lessons we learned over 20 years. Our efforts focus on reducing vulnerabilities to corruption by strengthening governance in 6 core state functions: central bank governance, financial sector governance, fiscal governance, market regulation, rule of law, and anti-money laundering. In our policy dialogue with member countries, we look at the strength of their anti-corruption frameworks, especially whether it is aligned with the specific issues confronting a country, and work with them on policy options to strengthen governance and corruption frameworks, anti-corruption frameworks. But we go beyond policy advice. At the request of country authorities, of course, we also provide technical assistance and training to policymakers in this area. And much of this effort is coordinated by the IMF's network of 17 capacity development centers across the world. In fact, we have 6 such centers here in Africa, including the Africa Training Institute, that work closely with countries and development partners to help develop and implement comprehensive governance reform strategies in areas from fiscal management and central banking, and support capacity building programs in anti-corruption and the rule of law. The IMF also adapted and stepped up its work in response to the COVID crisis. When the pandemic first hit, the fund took immediate steps to help member countries save lives and livelihoods. Our message was, spend what you must, but keep the receipts. In other words, prioritize urgent financing while preserving accountability and transparency. We set out a few parameters in that connection. First, countries receiving IMF emergency financing must commit to transparency and accountability safeguards. This included publishing COVID-19 related procurement contracts, including beneficial ownership of companies, conducting and publishing audits, and detailed reporting on COVID spending. Second, in cases of severe governance weaknesses, we worked with authorities to ensure remedies would be taken. And finally, for countries receiving emergency assistance that have or have sought multi-year IMF financing arrangements, we continue to closely engage with them on longer-term structural governance and corruption matters. We also engage with non-state actors, which can often provide valuable, very valuable insights into governance issues. So these efforts, we think, are vital for Africa, especially as the continent looks to the future. We know that the big economic opportunity before us is Africa's demographic dividend. To earn that dividend, however, we need to meet the aspirations of the new generation. A critical element to doing this is ensuring that public institutions, public resources are used effectively and that they contribute to shared and lasting prosperity of the people. And Africa's leaders are stepping up to this challenge, with some countries ranking even higher than many developed economies in the area of governance. We saw it in Rwanda, as it adopted more advanced institutions to rebuild from a devastating conflict. We saw it in the Seychelles, as it undertook comprehensive economic and institutional reforms to decisively tackle its 2008 debt crisis. And here in Botswana, we saw the development of a very good policy framework to prudently manage the wealth from the mining sector. Today, these countries lead the region in sound governance, but many others are also taking decisive steps forward. We've seen good governance reforms in countries such as Gambia and Senegal. Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, and Ghana have all enacted anti-money laundering frameworks. So what are the lessons that the region learned from these examples? First, the most successful countries in this area have a level of political commitment to good governance and transparency. You can see that in a number of ways. How their budgets are formulated and presented. They have open access about proposed policy actions. The independence of their central banks from political pressures. Their commitment to declaring assets of key public officials. And their resolve to publishing timely audits and following up on findings to hold organizations and individuals accountable. A second important element we see is respect for the rule of law and property rights. When foreign investors invest in a country, they do so knowing that the government will respect the contracts and that property rights will be enforced. A significant priority and an important third element many of these countries bring is ensuring efficiency, transparency, and public oversight of such investments. In a book that the IMF recently launched on good governance in sub-Saharan Africa, My colleagues point to studies that tell us that when there is not enough government oversight on the public procurement process, the costs of projects tends to be higher. And we see a massive need to increase public investment in Africa across infrastructure, health, and education, but in a way that is more efficient and transparent. A fourth element is access to information. When we speak to civil society organizations, this is one of the areas they emphasize, so citizens can be informed and can hold governments accountable for their actions. And finally, innovation and technology can play a big role in helping government deliver on these priorities. In fact, we saw countries rapidly adapt to the pandemic with innovations that helped governments across the continent serve their people more transparently and effectively. For instance, Sierra Leone launched online applications to improve the government's ability to track quarantine periods and other services like food delivery. Togo used technology to identify and validate the needy and mobile money to deliver direct cash transfers to them. And South Africa used chatbots to reduce the spread of the information on the spread of false information on COVID-19. These are just a few examples that show us why it is essential for policymakers to expand the use of technology to improve the efficiency of government processes and to also enable greater transparency. Integrating new technology into areas like financial management, procurement, or monitoring of natural resource management can revolutionize how governments work. It can also transform relations between government, the private sector, and civil society, reducing unnecessary meetings or interactions and enabling more dynamic and inclusive forms of oversight and monitoring. So let me close by saying that improving governance and accountability in Africa is not only possible, it is actually happening. As you heard from the examples I gave, of course, we have miles and miles to go in our efforts. And it is a long process that requires strong political commitment, strong political will, and consistent efforts over time. As each of our member countries move in that direction, I want to reinforce that the IMF is firmly committed to being a trusted partner in this endeavor. This conference is a stepping stone in the effort toward what is perhaps one of the most critical issues of our time. I would very much love to hear and look forward to your thoughts during this important conference, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Antoinette, for these insightful words. It is my pleasure now to introduce our second keynote speech from Mr. Jamel Grib, who is the Director of Economic Development, Integration and Trade at the AUC. Before doing so, I would like to really thank the AUC for the excellent collaboration we've had organizing this conference. It took us a lot of time and a lot of goodwill from both sides to reach this day, to meet today. Let me introduce now Mr. Jamel Grib, Director for Economic Development, Integration and Trade of the African Union Commission. He has more than 25 years of proven professional international experience and history of delivering superior results while ensuring excellence as a strategic visionary and advisor on policy, development and program management and coordination at Multilateral Development Bank, Intergovernmental Organization, UN System, private and public sectors, and international development agencies. Prior to joining the African Union Commission, Jamel Grape worked at the Islamic Development Bank, where he was in charge of critical functions and projects. Mr. Jamel Grape will read the keynote speech from the Deputy Chairperson of the Africa Union Commission. Mr. Grape, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, all protocol observed. Allow me at the onset to express our deep gratitude to the IMF, to Ms. Antoinette Saye, Deputy Managing Director, for having initiated such an important, timely, and hopefully promising meeting. Indeed, this successful collaboration between IMF, AUC, and the Bank of Botswana is in itself a testimony that Africa is moving in the right direction in line with the theme, promoting of good governance and fight against corruption. Thank you to all of our participants for taking the time to contribute to a topic closest to Africa's heart. Her Excellency, the DCP, Dr. Monique Zabaganwa, could not be present in Gaborone, the capital of Botswana, the land of smiles and generosity, because of other equally engagement in the member country. Let me take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to the government of the Republic of Botswana for hosting this crucial conference that brought participants from the worldwide. By joining forces with the International Monetary Fund and other key stakeholders present here to engage with member countries and on governance reform, we are initiating a new pathway, not just as a benefit our region, but hopefully to the entire world, something that we envisage to become the most potent force to advance our noble goals and the aspiration of African people. This conference will go through the latest legislation reforms, success stories in promoting good governance and fighting against corruption, and also assess in a transparent and inclusive manner the bottleneck that hinder the comprehensive implementation of rules of law, which aim at promoting durable governing system of law, good governance at the level of the institution, the benchmark, and norms on community commitment around key deliverable accountability and responsibility. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, African Union heads of state and government commitment to Africa transformation by adopting the African Union Agenda 2063, Africa Blueprint, and Master Plan for transforming Africa into the global powerhouse of the future aims to deliver on its inclusive and sustainable development goal. However, this ambitious instrument should be backed by at least 70% of resources mobilized domestically, including bolstering the fight against illicit money flows and corruption. My statement here is that corruption has a more devastating consequences on millions of people's lives than COVID-19. As you may know, corruption is undoubtedly the most pressing challenges to African governance and development. It has a devastating and corrosive effect on the continent's progress, stability, and development. It hinders economic growth by discouraging foreign investment, distorting resource allocation and market competition, increasing business costs, and reducing the net value of public expenditure. It also reduces the quality of services and public infrastructure and tax revenue, and encourage the detour of misallocation of scarce resources. Corruption undermines the rules of law, respect of human rights, accountability and transparency in the political arena of weakened public institutions. These tarnish the government public legitimacy and undermine good governance. The cost implications of corruption are harmful, and as it contributes to increased income inequality and poverty, and negatively affect the moral of values of society. Corruption challenges sustainable economic development, peace, and good governance. We all know the damage caused by corruption. In recognizing this threat, the African Union has developed legal instrument and monitoring system, at the top of which are the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, the Common African Position on Asset Recovery, and the Illicit Financial Fraud and Tax Strategy, which are the new tool to be adopted by the African Union in July 2022. This provides the regional continental legal framework perspective to which African government and citizens can refer in their effort to strengthen their governance institution and addresses problem of corruption. In addition, they can provide a basic for working with other countries in this realm. Allow me to acknowledge the presence in this conference of the Good Governance in Africa network, comprising of the following African bodies: Africa Tax Administration Forum, ATAF, the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative, CABRI, the Africa Organization of Public Accounts Committee, AFROPAC, the African Organization of Supreme Audit Institution, AFROSAI. These partners are strategic to the African Union in the fight against corruption and fight against the illicit financial flows. The EU, with its key stakeholders and partners, will continue to advocate for the speeding up of the implementation of rules of law that ensure the safe handling of public funds and the integrity of government system. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, almost all countries now have a government agency dedicated to fighting corruption. In addition, many countries have specialized agencies for specific area of anti-corruption work, such as Financial Intelligence Unit to combat money laundering and illicit flows, Integrity Team, Agency to combat conflicts of interest and illicit enrichment, and others. Corruption, however, does not seem to be moving, and Africa remains the region most affected by this scourge. The survey found that more than half of the citizens surveyed in 35 countries do perceive that corruption is getting worse in their country. 59% of respondents believe their government is still lagging behind in fighting the corruption. What else can we do? Today, my message is threefold. First, collective, articulated, and integrated approach needs to be envisaged in promoting good governance and fighting against corruption. The change doesn't come alone, but requires a collective wake-up response from all the stakeholders. I sense that in the past few years, attitudes have improved, and the world's views of corruption appears to have taken an unexpected turn for the better. There is a greater wish to do something to stop it. Second, we should all take advantage of fourth revolution impact and wave of element of trust that has brought to our life by introducing massively artificial intelligence and integrated e-platform solution that provide checks and balances in all transactions. We are encouraging the potential impact emerging technology to use and its advantages in bridging the gap between citizen and government. The opportunity of digitization to curb corruption is here, and we need to take advantage. Indeed, the response to the coronavirus crisis is providing a unique opportunity to reinvent government, rebuild trust, and accelerate the global fight against corruption, propelled by the smarter use of new technology and data analysis. Digital transformation is central to recovery plans, which will require agile government and cutting red tape, but also corruption-proofing reactivation program. Digitalization can disrupt corruption by reducing discretion, increasing transparency, and enabling accountability by dismantling services and limiting human interaction. Furthermore, it allows for more effective oversight by smarter accountability institutions and data-savvy civil society. My third argument is actually promotional campaign. It is an invitation to all of us to fight against corruption, to join forces and push government to support implementation of conventions through technical and legal assistance. Even more ambitionally, we aspire to be the world's conscience in the common fight against this scourge. To finish, I would like to come back where I started. Transparency and accountability are the means by which we shall implement a zero-tolerance approach, which is necessary to fight corruption, and concerted action and at both international level and by the domestic government is the only way to achieve those ends. When we are talking about fighting corruption, we are talking about securing democracy and rules of law for us and for our future generation. Corruption is a threat to democracy, on the one hand because it deprives public institutions of huge amount of money, on the other hand because it ruins trust in institutions, leading to instability, unpayable revolution, and more. This is what history tells us and about the relationship between checks and balance and corruption. We look forward for fruitful deliberation, but mostly implementable recommendation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rib, for these words. I took note of the fact that you have been reminding the audience that while progress has been made, as Antoinette was mentioning, there is still a long way to go. And you indicated many of the levers that can be used to expurge the region from this second pandemic. I think that's how Transparency International called it. So this brings us to the end of our opening session. I would like to ask our dignitaries on the three tables, sorry, just in front of me, if they could walk out with Diksha, who will accompany you outside for the group photo. Please, Diksha. And Mr. Massi Mega, please.